Okay, so at this point in the development of your communication strategy, I want to discuss with you the differences between the branding process and the advertising process. It's important for you to understand the differences now. It'll save you much pain and suffering later on. It's the not knowing these differences that gets everyone muddled. But don't worry, you're not alone. Many professional admin and marketers can't adequately make the distinction either. One, the branding side, is the creating, defining, establishing, and contextualizing, hopefully inspiring as well. While the other, the advertising, is the selling of what you've created, defined, established, and contextualized. Less analytically, it's the Lego set I previously mentioned at the beginning. A brand is all the bits and pieces that fit together to build something new and inspiring. Advertising is the attractive box it comes in, showing all the wonderful things that can be built using your brand. Your company's brand could have similar components to a competitor brand. It's in the way you put these components together that gives your brand its perceived shape. So your company brand can share many aspects to that of your competitors. Your offerings and processes may be similar. You may even sell identical products. It's in how how these aspects are put together and how they're connected relative to one another that distinguishes your company from your competition. So, using the Lego metaphor, your company or product brand may feel more colorful and rounded, while your competitor's brand may feel more squared and uniform, even though they are both using the same similarly shaped pieces. Similarly, your emerging brand could look something like this, with basic component parts, while your large global competitor would look something like this. The difference being your global competitor has far more branding components that, over time, has grown and sculpted a brand that has a distinct form and shape in the public's conscious. Hence the phrase brand building. It seems simple, doesn't it? However, most admin have a superhero like ability to convolute, complicate, and confound a methodology that is at its core accessible, logical, and human intuitive. There's a reason why most laymen think us admin are only one egg short of an omelette. It is my hope that after hearing this explanation, you'll think these differences in the processes are completely obvious and not confusing at all. However, if there's any lingering doubt as to how confounding it really can be, here is a dictionary definition of a brand.
The brand noun. A type of product manufactured by a particular company under a particular name. A new brand of detergent. Okay, that's fine, but it's a branded product. It's not what a brand is. The next one is a brand name. A company will market computer software under its own brand. Well, that's just the name of your brand, so not descriptive there. And my favorite, and strange enough, the most accurate one, in a very strange way, and I'll explain later, is a particular type or kind of something. Can you see now why it's so confounding and confusing? A particular type or kind of something. Well, let's get into it and let's try to explain this.
Now, that definition is about as clear as a foggy road in a deep ravine on a moonless night, and there you are, the layman, driving through with broken headlights. To make matters worse, branding methodology has many parallels and overlaps to the advertising process, making it real easy to lose your way. Just for your peace of mind, here are my layman's definitions of both.
What is a brand? Okay, this is pretty important. Now, you can ask 10 different people to define what they think a brand is, and you'll get generally probably about 9 different answers. And the people who kind of give a reasonable explanation, asking them to further that and say, okay, well, if this is a brand, then how from inception to market does that does that definition lend itself to an understanding of how to put the components of a brand together so it gives a full rounded picture of what your company is and your product and your offerings and your services and a full story and feel to your business company's brand. That's where all the understanding kind of falls flat. They might say, it's the personality of the brand, it's the flavor, it's the feel, and all that kind of stuff. They can't actually define the process in which you need to take in order to go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to finally a creation of a brand. Okay, so I'm not saying my definition is the only definition or the absolute correct one. The thing is, a brand is just that nebulous, amorphic, vague, skittish little creatures that are very difficult to define. But what I'm going to try to tell you is a manner in which you can understand the beginnings or the essence of what a brand is, and then you'll understand what next step to take and the next step to take to build on that understanding so you can create your own very purposeful, hopefully powerful, inspiring and incredibly tight brand. Okay, so without further ado, what is a brand?
A brand is nothing more than a promise. It is a promise that a company makes to the public. Whether your brand promises sex appeal, reliability, service excellence, technological advancement, luxury, refreshment, variety, you name it, they are all promises. Every item owned and action taken by your company is a reflection of that promise. The way the public relates to your brand's promise determines how successful your brand and ultimately how successful your company will be. So practically how it works is in this manner. Pretend you're standing face to face with a customer, trying to sell him, whatever it is you sell. For simplicity's sake, let's use known brands and let's see how a promise is applied in everyday real-world situations. So this is how I want you to begin. Always start with I promise to see if your brand promise holds true and if it has enough emotive clout to get through to a distracted modern consumer. Let's take Audi. Their promise is Voorsprong, which is technical advancement. This is a pretty good and focused, balanced promise, and it goes something like this. I promise you that if you buy this Audi, you'll be driving the bleeding edge of automotive science. Can you see how that promise holds true? It sounds like a plausible promise, and it's something they can invest in, defend, and build upon, which clearly they have. If you've seen any Audi advertising, you'll notice how all their communication revolves and pivots around technological advancement and them being first adopters or leaders in automotive technology. Let's go on to ABSA. Now, for those of you who don't know what ABSA is, or it's a bank, it's the Amalgamated Bank of South Africa. It's a very, very big bank in South Africa, and it's definitely one of the top 3. So, ABSA, their promise is today, tomorrow, together. Now, this is a very, very bold promise, and it goes like this. I promise you that if you bank with us, we will be there for you in your corner now and always. So that is a pretty bold promise, and depending on your attitude towards banks, whether you have a lot of money or not very much, this promise is really on the borderline of believability, especially when you take into account the trust issues people have with banks and how one always feels like no matter what you do, or whatever type of package you're on, you're getting reamed in some way or another. And even though it sounds really nice, in branding terms, congruency is far more important than how catchy it actually sounds. So if their actions don't match their promise on a consistent basis, the trust will be broken. So it is pretty risky. However, it's how you relate to ABSA's brand promise which gives ABSA its form and position in the market. because one thing is really true, and that's branding is probably the purest form of democracy there is.
Okay, let's take the example of Apple's older Think Different campaign and why it had such a powerful draw. Now, this is a very interesting example because it's one level down. It's not absolutely immediate. The superficial takeout, the superficial promise is, if you buy this Apple, you'll be part of an elite group of people who view the world in a different way. And that's quite nice. There is, however, what makes it very interesting, this particular example, that there's a subtext to that. It's not talking to just the public, they're talking about themselves. And that goes in the way that, like something like this. If you buy this Apple, you're buying into a company that has taken a different approach to how human beings interface with technology. So it has a dual component to it, even though it might be subliminal or it might be one level down. It is still very much there. It's accessible, even if it's just from an emotional point of view. It captured that moment, and it had dual purpose, which worked fluidly. It could change at any point, whether they're talking to a consumer, or about the consumer, or about themselves. So it worked really, really well. Things like Voorsprong couldn't do that. Voorsprong is talking exclusively about themselves and how they approach making cars. Think Different worked on both levels. Now, some of you may be saying, Matt, I don't know why you're showing us these super brands. My small company and trying to make a brand out of it has got no real relationship to these uber brands you're showing us. I'd say you're absolutely wrong. And to make yourself feel a bit better, here's a couple of examples of where Apple actually started. Do you see now? We all have to start somewhere. And I can guarantee you, by the time I finish with you, you'll be putting out ads and communications so much more interesting, compelling, and conceptual than the ones you're seeing here. In the coming days, try and notice the brands that interest you and their promises, and whatever aspect of the company's brand that you're exposed to, see if their promise holds true and if they're authentic to their promise. And you'll notice very quickly if there's congruency between thought and action. If their promise says one thing but doesn't quite give over that feel with the aspect of the brand you are looking at. So if it's a product side, or it's just a service aspect of their brand, or if it's just a customer service, or any actual singular aspect, apply this promise and see if their promise actually has believability and worth. That's what a brand is. Now, what is advertising? Advertising is the focused manipulation of a consumer's emotional state for the purpose of changing their purchasing behavior or personal perspective. In other words, selling stuff. Now, these manipulations take the form of predefined messages that are distributed through the consumer using multiple media platforms. Now, even though the word manipulation somehow always brings to mind a puppet master of sorts, in modern language the word is given actually a pretty bad rap. Manipulation doesn't always have to be negative. Morality aside, its true meaning is a skillful, artful, or clever influence over people or objects. The good or bad comes from you. I hope you can understand now the differences in the two words and what they actually mean. They are very, very different in premise, although people do mix them up. And especially gets confusing when you bring in brand advertising, because there is such a discipline like that, when you're not actually advertising one specific aspect of your company, but the entire company as a whole unit. So we're going to get back into that a little bit later.